Welcome to the Employment Services podcast. My name is Rana Kordahi and I'll be your host for today. I would love to introduce a very special guest. I'm so excited to have her here. I've been following her on LinkedIn for a while now and she's so inspirational. Her name is Kylie Van Luyn. Now, Kylie is the Director of Employment Services and Social Enterprise at SSI. She has extensive history in executive leadership, working in a wide range of not-for-profits, NGO, in employment and disability employment, as well as social enterprise sector. Now, in 2019, this year, April, Kylie was named the finalist for the 2019 Telstra Businesswomen's Awards for Purpose and Social Enterprise category. Now, one of the reasons I'm excited to have her because she's got at least 10 years experience in this space, and just some of the stuff she shares, she can teach us so much about this sector for both people that work in this sector and also people outside of this sector, such as employers and diversity managers. Thank you so much, Kylie.
Thanks, Rana. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So I'm going to just get into my first question, and that's usually in just 2 minutes, and we will find a lot more about you. But just in a nutshell, tell us a little bit about yourself.
A little bit about me. Well, you've covered, I guess, my experience in the sector. So I've been in employment on and off for about 10 years, predominantly in the not-for-profit space. I guess my career sort of it's quite diverse in the way that it's been employment, but mainstream employment, but also, as you said, focusing on some specific employment contracts supporting the most disadvantaged in the community, so people with disabilities certainly, but also more recently, probably as far back as 2014, been working very closely with people from refugee backgrounds and also people seeking asylum. And I think the reason that I've aligned myself to not just employment services, but those particular cohorts of people to support them is my passion for diversity and inclusion and social change and also social justice.
Thank you so much. I mean, you've got a wide, diverse experience in this sector as well. So the next question I'm going to ask is, what are the most important decisions you make as a leader of your organisation?
I think where I am now at SSI, but also working in the not-for-profit space or the profit-for-purpose space, the decisions that you make as a leader certainly have to align to the values of the organisation. All of the organisations that I've worked for previously have prided themselves and genuinely walk the talk when it comes to their values, and it's certainly no different here at SSI. So I think that leading by example and making sure that the decisions you make reflect those values, so integrity and respect and diversity and also social justice, there's some of the values here at SSI, and I use those to lead me when I'm making decisions as a leader. I think the other thing as a leader, not just here at SSI, but over the course of my experience as a leader and my career, has been always focusing on fairness. So when you're making decisions as a leader, the fairness and developing your team together, but also individually, so that the team that report into you, whether they're aspiring leaders or not, you can support their goals and aspirations as team members, but also as individuals.
That's definitely important. I do remember when I used to run induction training at SSI when I used to work there, the 2 hours of induction was all about the values and the mission and the vision of SSI. And so it was very important. Okay, so thanks for sharing that, Kylie. The next question I'm going to ask you is, what is one success story that you can think of where you or your team changed someone's life?
I thought about this. This is probably one of those questions that you don't, I guess, over sort of the past 10 years, there's been so many inspirational either young people or people with disability or people that have just arrived and settled in Australia that either myself or my team have assisted, usually my team directly, but certainly I like to get, into the front line and understand the impact and positive social impact that we're having on people's lives. So that's a really difficult question. So there's two examples. One is, I guess, more recently during my time here at SSI, hearing the story of a young woman from a refugee background who had arrived in Australia, and obviously one of the biggest challenges as somebody who's just newly arrived is that local work experience lacking when you're really looking for employment. But also there's a piece that comes before that, which is that, pre-employment piece around, I guess, the employability skills and building somebody's confidence and their sense of self-worth and all of those things. But for this young woman, it was really that piece that was missing. And, we don't understand when we see people first, in person, what their barriers to employment may be. Certainly we know what they tell us and also what we can see, but I think that everybody has a background story, and this young woman has certainly overcome a lot of things in her very short life, I guess, being so young, that we needed to really unpack that. And so one of the things that the team in my refugee employment program, they identified this young woman as one individual to be part of a group of women that we organised a professional women's mentor, and she took part in that program. And the difference in her, but also in a number of the other women that took part in that program, then made it sort of that stepping stone for her to feel confident to apply for roles, but also then when she was successful, going for interviews and really I guess that she wouldn't have got to that stage without that mentoring program and knowing that that she could do it. She had it in her. So that, I guess, was one of the more recent examples.
Wow, that's a great story.
Yeah, but certainly people with disability, there's been so many. I had a very personal interaction with somebody, probably it would have been about 8 years ago now, when I was still a relatively new manager, and she suffered a very serious mental health condition, and so working very closely with her family, but also herself to maintain that sustainable employment, which sounds like a no-brainer for people that don't have mental health or don't have a disability. But this young woman really did struggle in the workplace that she was in at the time. So working very closely with her and her family over the course of, it would have been a good year, a good 12 months, to make sure that sustainable employment was not just an aspiration but a possibility for her as well. And we got there in the end, and she was employed full-time, and that certainly made a difference then to the structure in her life and also managing her condition as well. It certainly was that last loop for her in her life. So social and economic participation was something that we aimed for and we achieved in the end. So just for anyone that's listening, because you did mention two programs, Refugee Employment Program, is that what? Yes.
And you also mentioned the Disability Employment Program, which is DES.
Yes.
So what are the, can you just, like, in a nutshell, what's the difference, what are they and what's the difference between them both?
Sure. So Disability Employment Services is a federally funded disability employment program. SSI delivers that in consortium with a lot of our Migrant Resource Centre partners, so that we have that footprint. We deliver disability employment in a very unique and different way, I believe, because of our understanding of the culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds that people come from, but also we're very much entrenched in those communities through our service delivery. So having a very person-centred as well as inclusive way of delivering that service, as well as our very diverse workforce that delivers that program, helps us achieve those outcomes for those particular people. The Refugee Employment Program is a program that SSI delivers, funded by the New South Wales Government. So we deliver that very close collaboration in partnership with the New South Wales Government, and we deliver that in Western Sydney and also the Illawarra. And that program focuses on supporting people from refugee backgrounds as well as people seeking asylum. And our target of people that we would really love to help by the end of that contract, and it's a 4-year contract, and we're in the middle, I guess, the halfway point of delivering that program. our aim is to assist 7,000 people, and we're certainly seeing some amazing outcomes come through both education and employment. But I think the important thing to note with that program is that the way that the program was co-designed was to not just focus solely on employment in isolation. And when you're thinking about the people in that program we're trying to support, there's a number of different vocational and non-vocational barriers that they face to employment. So the program was designed over 9 different outcome areas, such as, work experience, mentoring, education, English language proficiency. Employment is certainly an outcome area. But it really steps people from a refugee background through that process, whether it's also recognising their qualifications from overseas, whatever it may be. Those 9 outcome areas really do focus on the stepping stones that then result in employment. And we're sitting at a really good employment rate of around 20% for that program at the moment, so we're thrilled.
Oh, that's brilliant. Well done. Well done. And also, just going back to those stories that you shared, those 2 different stories, one for the with the refugee employment program and the other one for the DES program. I mean, those are just 2 stories that you know of, and probably know many, but sometimes there are so many stories that you've never heard where you and your team and the organization have made a huge impact as well.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to ask you, Kylie, now talking about, because we know that there's usually myths and misconceptions about people with disabilities and disability employment. So what are some of the myths and misconceptions about disability employment services or employment services in general, whether it is, refugee, job active, CDP program, all those kinds of programs? What do you believe, or what have you seen that employers, their perception of these programs?
I think there's certainly a stigma around employment services as a whole, without even going into, the specifics like disability employment or ParentsNext or whatever. There's certainly a stigma, and I think that comes from a range of different things. I think employers are, and some of the feedback I get when I speak to employers is that they are fearful, especially around, people with disability or people from refugee backgrounds or our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander programs. There's certainly a fear that they don't want to say the wrong thing in the workplace. And it comes back to, I guess, educating employers around the benefits around diversity and inclusion, and also there is a lot of training that training and support that employers can engage in to prepare the workplace to welcome people. But certainly I think there's a stigma, and anybody in the employment services sector, I'm sure, would agree that we certainly face a lot of barriers in trying to get employers on board sometimes, because there's been a stigma of job network or JSA or, job active or whatever it may be. So I think really breaking that down with employers and talking through the individual as opposed to the program is really important. I think as well there's a lot of misconceptions about people with disability as well, and their ability. So I think that the difference, the thing that we probably need to change when we're engaging with the employers is just really changing that narrative, talking about the abilities of individuals and not so much the barriers. So what people can do, what people are good at, those types of things as well. But certainly, I think from a job seeker perspective, there's some myths around employment services too, and a stigma as well about, we deliver ParentsNext as well as Job Active and DES here at SSI. And certainly when I engage with predominantly the women, the primary carer parents in ParentsNext, and some of their feedback that was a last resort. The perception of employment services is people don't want to be recipients of welfare or Centrelink benefits. They really would prefer to move into employment or training and seek that themselves. But often people find themselves in circumstances where it can't be helped. So I think working around that as well, that it's not a bad thing, and that employment services providers, we are here to help them and to assist them to reach their goals, whatever they may be.
Yeah, Definitely. So you've raised some really good points, especially about talking about the individual rather than the program, and changing the narrative. And obviously it's about what people can do. And also that there's another point, like I'd never really, because I've always thought about it, what do employers think about these programs, that I never really thought about. I mean, I've worked in employment services as a consultant, but I never really thought about what is the perception of the job seeker, because that's right, a lot of them don't want to be on the program, or it's also a stigma. They're not going to go and post on Facebook, I was at Centrelink today and I'm looking, you know what I mean? I guess some of them do, but it's not something that, so yeah, definitely you've raised some great points.
I think the other thing to mention there too is at the moment there is a lot in the media about employment services, about particular programs, you know, and unfortunately not everything in the media is positive and doesn't support our sector, whether it is true, accurate or indifferent. I think it further develops that stigma. So when you're talking to employers, the first thing they say is, "Oh, I heard about that on you know the radio or the news or online," and it really is. One would hope that those stories about sharp practices with providers or whatever, that's the minority. So it is our role to educate employers about best practice and genuinely what the majority of providers are trying to achieve, which is support people that really do need our support.
That's so true. That's so true. And it is, I mean, there's a lot of fake news out there, and sometimes it's just that one bad manager or one bad employment consultant that ruins it for the whole organization. So, sometimes they go in and they might not follow procedures, or they might break the law, but then it ends up being in the news and suddenly everybody's painted with the same brush, which is unfortunate as well. And you're right, it is about educating the different employers and raising awareness about what you do and the great work that you do. And I mean, this is one of the reasons why my inspiration to start this podcast, just to raise awareness about the great work. And why not hire somebody from employment services rather than paying thousands of, I have nothing against recruitment, but because you have the same quality people. I've had executives and CEOs and hardworking people on my caseload in employment services, and when I worked in recruitment, I had similar people. And there are the people with the barriers, and there's the people that you need to help eventually get job ready. But you do have a pool of amazing candidates that go to those recruiters, and recruiters are charging for them as well, charging to place them into work.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So thanks for that. I'm gonna go to my next question. So this is more about diversity and inclusion, because you've spoken a lot about it. You've sat on panels. You've given keynote speeches. What advice would you give to a workplace who is not embracing diversity and inclusion?
Do it.
Okay, yeah, I like that.
Get on board. That would be my message. I think that and I have spoken a lot about this, and it's certainly a passion of mine. I think we don't, as I said to you earlier, I think diversity and inclusion is quite a theme that's growing in momentum, especially with employers at the moment, knowing that those larger employers or corporates that have corporate social responsibility policies and targets, that inclusion needs to be more than, or diversity and inclusion needs to be more than just the latest buzzword or buzz phrase. That it genuinely does have benefits for business and workers or employers as well, if they're doing it for the right reasons. So if employers are doing this to tick a box, or to say, we have a target of 10 people from a refugee background each year that we need to recruit, but they're not changing their, unconscious bias in their recruitment practices, or they're not supporting the staff in the workplace, and they're not making the necessary adjustments in the workplace, whether that's people with disability or others, then they're not genuinely on board and committed to diversity and inclusion. So I think that it needs to be a genuine commitment. I think there's so many benefits to having not just a diverse workforce, but having an inclusive workforce. I think the number of people that you talk to, both employers as well as people within their teams, will say that it increases team performance, employee satisfaction, knowing that employees are working for an organisation that is committed to, social change, but also the diversity within the workforce, as well as the inclusion of people in the workplace. It's incredibly important to, I think, company morale. It minimises the risk of harassment and discrimination.
Yeah.
It also, and it's one of those things where it benefits everyone, not just those employees who may be intended target of diversity and inclusion, like Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, or women, or again, people with disability. It really does benefit everybody. And a diverse workforce means that you're able to cater to the needs of your clients as well, which is what we find here at SSI.
Yeah.
And I guess we're an example of that in the way that our staff at SSI speak over 100 languages.
That's true.
We have a huge focus on bicultural, bilingual staff, and that enables us to deliver all the programs across SSI, from settlement to employment to also our training that we offer to employers. It enables us to deliver those programs and services and support in a really different way, in a culturally competent, respectful and responsive manner. And I think it's important to note, and I've said this before on a couple of the panels and keynotes that I've given, is that employers often think that because you're diverse, that you're naturally inclusive, and that's not the case. I think having a diverse workforce but not being inclusive is really quite damaging. You'd rather not be either, because having a diverse workforce but not being inclusive, that causes all sorts of other problems. And inclusion doesn't come naturally, and I think that's important to call out as well.
Yeah.
But certainly when you can achieve it, there's a sense of belonging and staff feel welcome and accepted and supported. So, I often think it'd be amazing if we had a society that didn't just simply tolerate or accept diversity, that inclusion just came a lot more naturally, and we thought a lot more about it. It was a lot more considered than what it is at the moment.
So when you say inclusion doesn't come naturally, what do you mean? If you can just elaborate on that.
I think, there's a lot of talk about unconscious bias in recruitment practices, and a lot of unconscious bias training, and how do we get rid of our unconscious bias? And I don't think you can. It's one of those things that it's in us, it's built in us, and it's created over the course of how we're raised and our cultures and religious beliefs and spirituality and all sexual orientations and all those other things that before you don't realise, it's why it's called unconscious bias, before you realise you're doing it. So I think it's just taking a step back, and it's one thing that we do when we talk about our culturally responsive practice, when we do training both internally and externally. We get people just to stop and think for a minute.
Yeah.
Stop, using labels. You think about the language that you're using. It's really interesting when you start engaging with, other employees or your colleagues, and they're from different backgrounds, and you talk to them about just different things. And they're things that even, with some of my team, I would never have thought about. And I guess an example of that is a team member of mine said to me not long ago that it was quite confronting coming to Australia and starting work and hearing the phrase mate thrown around. And he was very off-put, thinking, well, I'm not your mate, but didn't realise it was just an Australian term of endearment almost.
Yeah.
But I think that, just being a bit more considerate in our workplace, but also thinking about, when you think about recruitment, do we ask the question if somebody needs an interpreter? Whether that's Auslan or whether that's a translator, do we ever ask people if they're going to need, hopefully all workplaces are accessible, especially for physical disabilities, but do people need wheelchair access? Do they, just asking those questions. I think we make, as a society and as employers as well, we make a lot of assumptions about somebody on the other end of the phone or at the other end of a CV.
Yeah.
But also, there's a cultural piece there as well. And it was something I spoke about not long ago, was there was it was more of a test really, but a lady put together a CV using a different surname, more of an Anglo Celtic surname, and then she also put her CV together. Her CV got knocked back every time, as opposed to the same employers with the same CV, just a different name, that then called her in for interviews. So I think that's also something that we need to think about, is our unconscious bias when it comes to cultural diversity as well.
Yeah, so that CV one, I've done it myself because I obviously don't have an Anglo name. And
yes.
Anytime I applied for a job, I had to always send my CV and then pick up the phone and make a call. And that's why I think, I don't know, going a little bit off topic, but I think that, I mean, what you raised about inclusion doesn't come naturally. It was just a kind of a really great insight for me, because I know that I have unconscious bias, whether it's to do with, like, once I was looking to recruit a salesperson, and I spoke about it on LinkedIn, and I said how I was visualizing a guy in a suit. And then the next day I thought, why am I visualizing this guy in a suit? And then I realized that because salesmen, all the people that I know that work in sales or television, you know, when you visualize a leader, it's always a man, because there's a lot of men on stage. Then I realized, you know, I've been conditioned in a sense for unconscious bias, but at the same time, it's something that is so important to be aware of. And Absolutely. Then when you're aware of it, so when you're looking at someone's CV and you look at a foreign name, you're not going to be, you go, okay, that's my unconscious bias, but no, I am going to look at this resume and just be aware of that and kind of, go against that.
It's phenomenal, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, you've made some great points. I really like how you said when it comes to diversity and inclusion, it has to be for the right reasons, right? Not because we need to fill this a female, because I've been invited to speak, and just because I was a female, and they said to me they need to fill the quota for female, and I was actually offended. So I don't know. I was like, is that why you want me? I don't know if that's ever happened to you. Because
yes, it does. Yeah, it does happen.
And you don't know whether it's for your skill or because it's great to get the opportunity.
Ticking a box.
Yeah, ticking the box. So it has to be for the right reason, and it has to be, and if the male and the female, and the male is more skilled, then go for the male. But at the same time, it's important to be embracing and not ticking the boxes and aware of the unconscious bias. So, I mean, you've raised some phenomenal points, and I would have loved to see you speaking about this in your keynote as well. So you speak with a lot of passion.
There's a lot to cover, so.
Yeah, so I'm going to go to the next question. Now I'm going to move on to leadership, because you've been a leader in employment services and NGOs and not-for-profits for quite a while. So now I want to talk specifically about employment services. I mean, leadership is transferable, but employment services, I find that it is a little bit sales driven. So it's like leadership, but sales management. So it's a little bit different. That's why I want to talk about just employment services. Yeah. What advice would you give to a leader coming into employment services for the first time?
It's funny. This was another one that sort of was a bit of reflection, because this is, I guess, 10 years ago, this was me. So, and lucky for me, I had a really supportive leader who, recognised potential in me and gave me a go, but also supported me through my journey for, I think, would have been a good year before then, we moved onto different things. But I think for anyone going into leadership, so I guess just that piece first before we go into the specifics around leadership in employment, I think be patient and be kind to yourself. I spoke to somebody this morning who was a direct report of mine last year, and we were reflecting and talking about how leadership it can be a really lonely job, and I've had that conversation with pretty much all of my direct reports. When you move from leading frontline staff to leading leaders, it really is different, and it's a bit of a gear change.
Yeah, that's true.
So, and then more specifically, leadership in employment, there's a lot to learn in it, not just only in employment services as a sector, regardless of what contract you're leading, whether it's Job Active or ParentsNext or DES all the bits in between. There's a lot to learn. Contractual obligations and KPIs and expectations from our various government departments. It's a very complex sector, I think, and so I think coupled with being a new leader and also needing to learn a lot about yourself as a leader at the same time, that can be really challenging for an individual. So that would be some advice, is be patient. Hopefully you've got a really supportive leader that can show you the way, and that this isn't your first time in employment. I've had that as well. People in leadership roles in employment for the first time, and you think, wow, it's a double whammy almost, isn't it?
Yeah,
really?
I've seen that.
And they're trying to navigate, such a complex environment. And I think as a leader too, depending on what position you hold in employment services, then you've got a lot of that external facing work that is expected of you. You're meeting with different government departments and funding bodies and large employers and community groups and whatever that may be, and some of that might involve public speaking or whatever. So I think there's a lot to it, and it depends on what level leadership you're looking at. But you're right. I think employment services, more and more, it is becoming, especially with the new DES contract, we've seen it's highly competitive. There's a lot of providers. The market's saturated with providers, so you need to understand what's your point of difference as a provider. And I think regardless of whether that's a highly competitive contract like DES or something different like Job Active, that's really important, is to understand what your unique point of difference is, or your value prop, and how you sell that or promote that to your stakeholders. But I think, look, going back to what you were saying, it's incredibly sales focused. It's very KPI driven. So I think that because the sector and the contracts that we deliver are heavily focused on performance, and the profit margins are slim. They're not. We're not all in this to make huge dollars. It's certainly to deliver a service that makes a difference, and hopefully some social change. But I think the piece of advice I'd give would be something similar to what I received as a manager in my first leadership position going into employment, was to engage with your team. I think people really underestimate face-to-face regular engagement with their team. Employee engagement is, you can do all the surveys in the world that you like, but if staff know that their leader has got time for them, it speaks volumes. And I think not just engage with them, but genuinely listen. And we're all so busy. We've all got lots of direct reports, and often you think, I really need this time to do something else. But that is such a huge investment of your time. So I think to get the return on investment is really engage that time with your team one-on-one, bringing them together as a team also, but certainly listening to them. And leading your team in such a way that you eventually become superfluous, so they don't need you anymore. And that, as a leader, is for me over the last few years in particular, has been the reward for me, is seeing people that you've mentored and coached, and new leaders in particular that have really stepped up, and they sort of grow their wings and they fly off and they don't need you anymore. It's kind of like children, really. Yeah. But that's, I think, the main advice that I would give is listen to those that have been in the sector for a long time, learn as much as you can, and really do that balance between, head and heart, managing the contractual stuff, the obligations, the KPIs that we need, the placements, the caseload growth, all those, important things, but also don't lose sight of engaging with the people that deliver it. They're the most important.
Definitely. And I mean, your KPIs depend on their performance as well. So I love what you said about head and heart. Don't lose sight of the strategy, the KPIs, the placements, but at the same time, listen to the people and that face-to-face engagement. That's brilliant advice. And yet you're 100% right. It's definitely a very complex industry, and a lot of leaders that have gone from a different industry, gone straight into leadership, and they have never been on the front line, it is a little bit more challenging for them as well, because they have to navigate in a different type of world as well. So, Kylie, my last question for you is, why did you choose, I mean, maybe employment services chose you, I don't know, but why did you choose this industry and this career path, and why do you stick to it?
Someone asked me that the other day. Last week I had a conversation with someone who said to me, over the course of the last 10 years, you've gone right into employment, you've pulled back a little bit, done more strategy work, gone back into employment. Like, what is it that keeps pulling you back in? And I was having a particularly bad day and thought, geez, I don't know. Which I thought everybody can relate to that. But I think at the end of the day, it's really about making a difference. You get up in the morning, you have to like what you see.
Yeah.
And if you can and I think that's also been the draw card with me, getting more and more involved in specific employment programs where you can see a genuine change in the people and the cohort of people that you're trying to support. So I think definitely making a difference and seeing people succeed and transform. You've got job seekers who have been long-term unemployed in Job Active for a long time, and to see those people, there's just a catalyst for them one day, and they make that transformation, and then to hear either from them or from their consultant that they've gone to an interview, and then you're sort of waiting with bated breath to hear what happens, and then you hear they've been placed, and then you see them. It's like seeing a totally different person. So that for me is what keeps me in the industry, or keeps bringing me back into the industry. I think regardless of who you are and where you're from, that social and economic participation that employment gives is really important to how people live a fulfilling life. And that can be, again, it can be anybody, people with disability. I was at the NESA conference with the thousands of other people last week. And, one of the guest speakers was she was a lady with a disability, and she was talking about how employment really, it changed her life. But also having the right workplace and the right manager and the right colleagues that supported her and her disability, how that it was huge for her. And I think, when you talk about disability in particular, and we constantly are talking about the NDIS and certainly the conversation between or the connection between disability employment and the NDIS, and those people that you hear at conferences that talk about, that they made a commitment and insisted on having employment in the NDIS plan, and how then when they found employment that was suitable for them and their disability, it really does transform people's lives. So I think that's what it is for me that drives me to stay in this industry.
Yeah, because you've been in and out, but it keeps, I guess that social impact that you're making and changing lives, as they say in this industry, changing people's lives. And I can kind of relate to that because I do have the Something Academy. And to be honest with you, I can make a lot more money if I just focus on the Something Academy, but I'm always going back to employment services because of that impact, like even just helping the employment consultants and strengthening them, and then seeing them being able to help other people, that's very rewarding as well. Yeah. So, and you said that you do a lot of strategy work. That was meant to be my last question, but I'm just curious, what kind of strategy work were you doing?
A lot of, so I worked on a large joint venture. Yeah. In one of my roles, and it was the first of its kind. It was a joint venture between a large not-for-profit, one of the largest in Australia, and a large employment services provider for disability, delivering disability employment, but also then looking at diversifying the offering of that new entity that was created just to add employment as the end of that loop, in particular for primary care parents, but also people with disabilities. So there was that piece of work which I found incredibly satisfying. I've been involved in leading a lot of large national tenders and that type of strategy work as well. So mergers and acquisitions and joint venture that I just mentioned, but also large tenders, which I think is, you have to be a special kind of person, I tell you, to go through the project management aspect of building a large tender, especially if you've got multiple partners involved. But there's certainly a high and a bit of a adrenaline rush in being involved in that type of work as well, especially when you win the tender. Yeah. So there's that. There's been a lot of strategic planning and business planning, and just building partnerships, more strategic partnerships where you can see a need or a gap in an industry or in employment in particular.
Yep.
And sourcing those people out. So whether it's another social enterprise, whether it's a large corporate that wants to build a pre-employment model or have a recruitment model built around a specific cohort of people that they're really interested and committed to supporting. But it's been a journey for sure.
Yeah, so I mean, I can see that you've got a great mind. You're very highly intelligent, and anyone that works in tenders has to be very intelligent and patient. So, with strategy and tender. Yeah, exactly. So, thank you so much. I just want to, before I let you go, I want to know, where can people find you? So, just on your LinkedIn, or where can they find you if they want to reach out to you, whether it's to do with finding some of your candidates because they want to hire them, or inviting you to do a keynote, or inviting you on their podcast?
Yeah, LinkedIn. Look, LinkedIn is such a great platform. I've connected with a lot of people over LinkedIn for a number of different things. People looking sort of for a little bit of advice around disability strategies, or disability awareness, or anything to do with people from refugee backgrounds, or whatever it may be. But certainly LinkedIn is probably the best place to start, I think.
Okay, so I'll put your LinkedIn in the show notes as well. So thank you so much once again, Kylie Van Luyn.
Yes.
Did I say it right? Luyn.
You did.
Kylie Van Luyn, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. I've learned so much from you. And I mean, it's one of the reasons why I do this podcast as well, just to learn and, reach a level of mastery even in my own business in employment services. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me. Pleasure.